During the summer quarter, you probably received many emails, instructions, training, reminders, and even more emails about enrollment verification and progress reports. And many faculty are probably wondering, what's the big deal? What is all this fuss about with enrollment verification and progress reports? I thought this would be a great opportunity to explain to everyone about the importance of enrollment verification and progress reports and what happens behind the scenes that makes it so important that we, as faculty, get it right the first time that we have to submit these reports. Perhaps the best way to understand is to see what happens behind the scenes. Let's look at a couple of different scenarios. In the first scenario, we have a student who attended all of their classes. They're attending 4 classes. They attended week 1 and week 2, and in every enrollment verification report, they are marked as being present. What happens to this student? The good news is nothing happens. Nothing is done. The student continues as scheduled. And advisement is quite happy because they don't have to worry about this student. They have attended classes and there is nothing that needs to be done behind the scenes. But let's look at a different student. A student who was absent during every one of their classes during week 1 and week 2. And on the enrollment verification reports, they are marked as having never showed up for class. In this case, the student is withdrawn from all of their classes. They proceed out of the enrollment period and they are no longer appearing on the class rosters. Has received financial aid money, that money is returned to the government. Many of you are probably wondering, but what if a withdrawn student shows up for a class after being removed from the class roster at this point? Again, the answer is send them to advisement. They may not attend class. Since the student has been withdrawn from all of their classes and they are no longer appearing on the class roster, you need to make sure that they go to advisement because technically they are not in the class. And if they were a financial aid student, they are not receiving money to attend the class. Let's take a look at the same student. Perhaps they were marked as having never showed up, but suddenly there's an issue. The faculty made a mistake and alerts advisement that they accidentally marked their students as being absent. This has happened in the past, and in such a case, advisement has to search through thousands of lines in a report in order to make the change manually. And, very important, they must notify the government of the mistake. So you can understand that it's a big process if you make a mistake on the enrollment verification report. In addition, if there are a lot of mistakes and advisement has to go back to notify the government of these mistakes for financial aid students, the government could scrutinize the college, which could create problems in the long run for Berkeley College. Let's take a look at a different student. This student attended 2 of their classes and were marked present. But in 2 of the classes, there was no enrollment verification status noted. They were, in fact, left blank. In this case, unlike the happy, smiley advisors that we saw before, we have the case where advisement goes crazy. Our gentle, kind, warm, and fuzzy advisors lose their mind over the number of blanks that are on these reports because this forces them to have to search that same 15,000-line report to make educated guesses about the student's status. If an entry for a class is left blank, advisement has to go through these records and make educated guesses to determine whether or not the student attended or not. Sometimes, if they make the determination that the student did not attend, when indeed the student was attending, the student will come back to advisement asking for reinstatement, but they may have already lost their financial aid. Many of you may be wondering, why can't they just reach out, give me a call, ask me what's going on? possibly ask what happened with the student. The problem here is that we have advisors who need to search for the instructor, send out emails, make phone calls for each one of those students. And if you times that by the number of courses the students are taking and the number of blank lines in the report, plus their deadline to report to the government, you can see that it's impossible. There are multiple people looking at this report, and it must be final at the time that the report is run. There's simply not enough time for the advisors to contact the faculty and find out what the status is with the student. Let's look at another scenario. Another student. They attended week 1 and 2 of 3 of their classes and were marked as being present. But in their 4th class, they were absent and marked as having never showed up. What happens in this case? Well, in this case, nothing is done. The student continues as scheduled. In this case, advisement is going to use the highest percentage of classes to presume that the student is still in attendance at the school and not remove them from that class. But if we continue with that student and we find out in week 3 during that progress report that they are again marked as having never showed, the student is withdrawn from that class. In this case, money will be returned to financial aid if the student is on financial aid, and in some cases, if the student falls below the 12 credits that are required to be a full-time student, they will lose all of their financial aid and owe money back to the government. This presents a hardship for students when they want to come back for the next quarter because now they owe a lot of money that they previously thought financial aid was going to pay for. But some faculty might be wondering, what happens if a student who doesn't show up week 1 and 2, but is in communication with a faculty member during that time period and submits work? What happens to them? Should we mark them as being absent? They weren't in class. Or should we mark them as being present, even though they never showed up? In this case, if the faculty member presumes that the student is going to show up in the class, they should mark them as having been present. Because if they are marked as never showed, they could possibly be removed from the class and therefore lose their financial aid. This is particularly important with students who are in the military. If they are away on training, if they have to go to the reserves, then we need to work with those students to make sure that they are marked as being present so that they don't lose their aid and can come back to class since they are indeed in communication with you, the faculty member. Scenario 2, what happens if a student was a no-show week 1, 2, and 3, but shows up during week 4? In this case, the student should be informed they are not allowed to continue with the class. Frankly, they've missed too much material. A student who has missed week 1, 2, and 3 has missed at least 25% of the quarter and cannot and should not be allowed to continue. Tell them to go immediately to advisement and do not let them sit in that class. Advisement will not reinstate the student back, even if the faculty grants permission. Let's take a look at another scenario. A student who attended week 1 and 2 in all of the classes and was absent for week 3 in only one class, and then was absent again for that same class in week 6. Advisement will withdraw that student from the 4th class, the one they were absent from in week 3 progress report and in week 6 progress report. Advisement has to go back and look at all the different progress reports to verify the date of last attendance in order to report that for financial aid. Students will owe money up to that point. During this past quarter, a lot of faculty had wonderful reasons for being a little bit delayed. The bottom line is that we have deadlines because advisement needs this information to collect to run on a specific date, and these reports are only run one time. So any additional information that you email to advisement regarding these students' attendance is not necessarily added manually to the report, but they have to monitor it and track it manually. Each report contains the total number of students multiplied by all of their classes that they are enrolled in for the quarter. In addition, it's extremely important for faculty to constantly look at the class roster. How often do you need to run your class roster? Every week. Remember, students can still add classes up to Friday of week 1. So if you run it week 1 and don't check it again, you could be missing students on your class roster that signed up a little late. In addition, from week 3 to week 9, students could be removed because they were not in attendance on the progress reports. It's extremely important that the faculty comply with the deadlines and check these class rosters to make sure that students who are sitting in the class have indeed met the attendance requirement and are sitting there as legitimate students.